Right, uh, hearers, we thank the Lord for this blessed day. Once again, this is your pastor and your prophet, Duodu Henry Appiahkorang. Today, I have a personality with me. We are going to have a discussion today about several things about his book, about Christianity, about religion, and several conversations. So, before we start our conversation, we want to know who our guest is today. Can we know who you are?
Sure, yeah, I am Joseph M. Lenard. I have to use my full name because there is a Joseph Lenard out of South Carolina who's also an author. So to keep the distinction between us two, Joseph M. Lenard, and it looks like Lenard, but it's not French. It's Leonard without an O. I was born and raised in Southeast Michigan, and even though I hate the winter here, I do choose to stay here in Michigan rather than move. I've been a political activist, an author, a speaker, and now I am a podcaster. I just started and trademarked the term Christitutionalist, which stands for Christian U.S. Constitutionalist. Christitutionalist Politics Podcast, of course, can be picked up anywhere. I am turning 61 this year, and I don't know what else more maybe do you want to know, or not, or is that too much already? I like to say I was born of the 60s, but I'm much a person of the 80s. You know what I mean? The Reagan era, the Reagan boom.
All right. Alta Joseph Leonard. Is that the right name I mentioned? Your full name is Alta Joseph Leonard, right?
Yeah, Joseph M. Leonard. They gotta use that middle initial M because of that other author, or people will confuse us.
All right. So, what is the full meaning of the M, the middle name?
Well, M is Martin. Was my father's middle name, and I got that, and I'm Joseph after my grandmother on my mother's side, Josephine, and of course Saint Joseph. I was born and raised Catholic. Uh, but as my friend Pastor Rick says on a local radio show here, I'm not your normal average Catholic because I study all faiths and religion, all the Christian sects, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, all those things. I like to know about the other faiths. So it doesn't make me question mine, it reaffirms my faith. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote Terror Strikes Coming Soon to a City Near You book. Obviously, about terrorism, it's not your normal, traditional, fluffy kind of Christian book, but it is one nonetheless. I wrote it so that I'm not preaching to the choir, so to speak, right? The only way you reach others with the word is to write something that interests them, that they will read, and you deliver the message in a non-preachy way. You could go to terrorstrikes.info/extras dash Christian dash references, or you can find it under the More tab at terrorstrikes.info about the Christian references that are indeed in the book.
All right. Alta Joseph M. Leonard. So, you said you did some studies about several religions, about Buddhism and others. So, what makes Christianity different from the other religions, and why did you choose Christianity than the other religions?
Well, again, I was born and raised into Catholicism, so it would have taken, somebody born into Buddhism, obviously, or into Islam. I can see and understand it would take a lot for us to sell Christianity to them because, they were born and raised that way. And same with me, but being born into Christianity, I wanted indeed to test my veracity of my own faith by looking at the other religions and seeing whether I thought, hey, Maybe there's more to that one than my religion, but none of them offer what Christ offered to and for us on that day he gave his life for us. And I know a few Messianic Jews because obviously Jesus was a Jew. He was born a Jew. He came to fulfill the Jewish Torah scriptures. Christianity isn't really its own religion, it's really a Messianic Jew. We are all Messianic Jews in a sense because Christ fulfilled the Jewish scriptures and became King of the Jews and God for us all.
Right. I think my connection was trying to disconnect. So, if I could get you well, you said you were born into a Catholic home, right? And then you did study some. So, can you maybe give a little summary of what you study, what you learn in other religions, and then what you didn't like about the other religions, or maybe what you learned through your personal studies with the other religious body, and how you can connect that to Christianity?
Well, again, in the biggest thing of studying other faiths that reaffirmed my faith in Jesus was the study of Islam. Because a lot of people don't understand the Quran has the Torah in it. It has Genesis in it. It has Jesus in it. It has Noah in it. Islam recognizes Jesus as a so called prophet of the same God, Allah. Allah is just an Aramaic Christian term. It is supposedly us worshiping the same God, but they don't recognize Jesus as fulfilling the messianic scriptures. They recognize they don't recognize that. So in my mind, and I've talked to a lot of others who have left the Muslim faith, they indeed recognize the fact that Muhammad, and peace be upon him to any of our Muslim listeners, but Muhammad created a Me Too faith and a faith meant for the Arabic community to build upon, like Christianity built upon Judaism, but really isn't a separate faith. Muhammad tried to create a faith relevant to fellow Arabs. And a lot of Arabs I know left the Islamic faith because they recognize that really that's all still pointing back to the Torah and to Jesus. It's fulfilling those scriptures.
All right, that's great. So, making a comparison about your own personal experiences, we want to know what have made you to stay in Christianity. What have really increased your faith to stay in Christianity, so that others who are hearing you can also learn on your faith and how you're able to stand all these 60 years without you going back to other religions and then you staying with Jesus Christ or you staying in the Christian.
Right. Well, again, I mean, that my own faith is bolstered by looking at other religions and them, in my mind, falling short. Only one faith, one religion, either Christianity or, again, you can call yourself a Messianic Jew, it's the same thing. Uh, Only one faith has someone come from heaven, sacrifice themselves on the cross to be that final blood sacrifice. We no longer adhere to the Torah sacrifices of sheep and lamb because Jesus was that final sacrificial lamb for all mankind. And the other faiths just reaffirm they're lacking of any of that.
Wow. So Christianity. has a personal let's say combination, right? So Mr. Joseph, if I can call you maybe Mr. Joseph, that's very great. Mr. Joseph M. Lenard. So at least you've been a Christian for almost 60 years, so let's say for almost some years now, for a long years now. So let's say a new Christian approaches you and he asks you that how can he or how can he rely on the Christian faith than to believe on other religions. So how will you answer such a believer or such a new baby in the faith, that how can he stay, or how can you assure him that Christianity is the only way to the Father? How can you convince such a Christian that
Sure.
Christianity?
Well, that is a very, very simple question for me to be able to answer. Uh, I would have you, obviously, I think you should read my book, Terror Strikes Coming Soon to a City Near You. And you can go to terrorstrikes.info/shop, and there's a link to international sales. And my book is indeed available on the African continent. Uh, African continent. Why did I say African American? We're so caught up in the term here, African American, that when I said Africa, American automatically accidentally came out. But yeah, my book is available there. But two, I would have you read Lee Strobel's The Case for Christ. And the reason I do that is because he was an atheist and he married a Christian. And he kind of actually got upset and decided he was going to investigate and disprove Christianity. And the more he dug into it, he discovered Jesus and the facts of the Bible and the archaeological truths that prove the Bible. So he became a Christian. He converted himself from atheist to Christian rather than converting his wife from Christianity to atheism. So Lee Strobel's The Case for Christ, and there's also a movie by that name based on his writing of his book. So obviously, I would suggest you read my book and read his book.
Oh, that's great. So the book is Lee Strobel, The Case for I think I've heard of that book. I'll try and myself go and then search the book and read for myself. So let's say you've read the book, right? You've read.
Yep.
All right. So let's assume that you want to give a summary of that book. How will you summarize that book for our hearers, for them to just get a glimpse of the book, so that we can all go and then pick and then learn from that book, and then also from your book as well? How will you summarize your book? So let's start from Lee Strobel book, The Case for Christianity, and so that we can move on there to your book, and we can also dive deeper into your book as.
Yeah. Well, again, Lee Strobel's book, A Case for Christ, goes through all the things he went through in his life at that time to try and disprove Christ as a myth, a legend, an unreal person, didn't really exist. And his journey took him on discovery to indeed show Christ was real. There are records to show it. And the faith part is, of course, accepting him as the Son of God and the miracles he presented or engaged in. And the more and more he studied, he presents to people in his book, The Case for Christ, his realization that the Bible is spot on. It's not just some mythological book. It's just not a collection of stories that some people made up. And as for my book, Terror Strikes Coming Soon to a City Near You, there are many Christian references in the book. Again, not trying to be a pushy, preachy kind of Christian book, but one that an atheist could read and still get bits of the word to hopefully bring them to Christ. And like I like to say, yes, my book is about terrorism, but it's not a book about death, but of life and living, life over death, hope over fear, faith over despair, love over hate, good over evil, individualism over collectivism, freedom over tyranny, family and friends, life.
Wow, that would be a very great book to read. I'll really go and check out your book. Wow, that's very great. So I think you did mention many things. So let's pick them. Let's say one by one. How can one have faith over in that connection? I want to emphasize that place again. How can one have faith over despair in that place? So can you just go into that chapter?
Yeah, the life over death, hope over fear, and faith over despair, love over hate, all of those kind of go together. I'm not trying to sell fear porn. Like here in the United States, a lot of people are turning off the news, especially after the Wuhan virus hysteria and the fake jabs that are nothing more than a glorified flu shot. They are not a vaccine. A vaccine actually makes you immune to a disease. You need one shot only, sometimes maybe one follow up, then you are immune, like mumps or measles or a polio or a tuberculosis vaccine. Those are real vaccines. But for 3 years, the American news media has been selling what we call fear porn. They want you to tune in, clickbait, as it's known online on the internet, right? Scare tactics, anything to get you to tune in, to listen, and to scare you into obedience. And this is about faith, having your faith. You know there's something more. There's something greater than self and something greater than this planet to look forward to. Faith over that despair so they cannot terrorize you into submission, which is what it's about. Power and control over you by keeping you afraid and docile and moldable. When you answer, when you answer to Jesus, right? No king but King Jesus, as our founding fathers in America said. You worship God. You worship no man, not even the Pope, as I'm Catholic. I don't worship the Pope, especially this current nincompoop, as I coined the phrase for him. He seems more interested in communism than Catholicism. So I worship Jesus. I worship no man. I follow no man. If you tell me something that's a great idea, and will I join you in that cultus? They want you like this climate hoax, planet worship rather than worship of Jesus. They want you to worship politicians, them as God, and you must follow their dictates. No, hell no, not happening.
Right. Um, let's of your book. What really inspired you to really write your book? What really inspired you? What motivated you? What empowered you? What came into you for you to write that book? For the world and for Christians and for the whole body.
Well, I I've been writing for many decades now. I think I mentioned my father, Ted Leonard Jr. in the Polka Kings. He had a band, so I got my creative gene from him, and they come to me in a dream. So to me, they are divinely inspired, and that book was no different. It came to me in a dream, and again, all those things: life over death, hope over fear, faith over despair, love over hate, good over evil, individualism over collectivism, freedom over tyranny, family and friends, life in general, as a message I knew I had to bring to the world.
All right, that's great, author Joseph M. Lenard. So, what biblical foundations can you stand upon to say that your books are inspired? So, let's say you have some Bible quotations, some biblical scriptures to hold up your foundation.
Yes, again, there is under the More tab on my info a list of several scriptures that I go into, and let me pop open a document here. Like obviously, John 3:16, for God so loved the world, he sent his only son, right? Job 8:6, Proverbs 132. I'm not going to cite them, I'm just going to give the reference. Isaiah 54:17, 2 Corinthians 6:1, 1 Corinthians 13:13, Psalm 9:17, Hosea 4:6, Matthew 7. I especially needed to quote Matthew 7, judge not lest ye be judged, because a whole lot of people stop there. That's not the whole scripture. And it also leaves out 12 other contextually related scriptures that tell us we are to judge biblically others. We are not to condemn, for final judgment is that of the Lord's, not ours. So judge biblically, just don't condemn, right? Again, 12 other scriptures that put that into context, that we are indeed to judge. We are not to be a hypocrite. We are to judge based on biblical standards ourselves and others, while still recognizing we are all human, frail, flawed. None of us are perfect. All of us sin in one way, shape, or form. So keeping that in mind when we judge others.
All right. I also went through your blog and then your site and some of your sections. I learned that you are also into politics. So, is it morally upright, or is it biblical for a Christian to enter into politics?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Let me refer you to another friend of mine, Neil Mammon, who had a book called Jesus Was Involved in Politics. You should be too, and so should your church. Absolutely. Now, you're in Africa, but in the United States, Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter famously known as the Separation of Church and State letter, and the American left, or the fascocrats, as I call them, because frankly, they're no better than the Nazis, the El Duce, or Franco in Spain. They want one party dictatorial rule. And they try to peddle the notion that there is a freedom from religion. No, our Constitution guarantees in the First Amendment freedom of religion to practice. There is no distinction, there is no separation from church to the state. Christians absolutely, positively not only should be involved, must be involved. Read Romans. You must be a citizen and you must be an activist. And one of the other scriptures that gets maligned a lot is render unto Caesar, right? That does not mean that we get to give up our charity, our dictate, our be our brother's keeper is a commandment from God, our own personal responsibility. That does not mean socialism, communism, or fascism, where you steal from the neighbor on the right side of you to give to the neighbor on the left side of you and pretend you've done something. You didn't. That is theft. You stole from someone to give to another. That's not what render unto Caesar means. Redistribution of wealth is theft, not charity. And also, you could go to terrorstrikes.info/charity. I have several charities that I try to promote. It is our own Christian duty to be charitable and to be our brother's keeper, not to pawn it off on government. So we are to be involved and prevent the government from stealing from one to give to another, because it again is our own personal charitable commandment to do so. To find at my site. I also have josephmlenard.us. Again, Leonard does not have an O in it. josephmlenard.us is my author site. Terrorstrikes.info is my book site. And at the bottom of every page of my terrorstrikes.info site, it has this warning. Many deem my book to be controversial and upsetting, and it is meant to be. It is meant to make people think. I'm not looking for sheeple here. To challenge one's own and others' intentions, motives, own morality, and mortality. While this is a historical fiction book, meaning there is some historical in it, or as I call it, faction, it's part fact, part fiction. The fiction kind of plays off the fact, and the fact is there to bolster the reality of the fiction that I am offering. So they are fictional characters in most cases in here, dealing in fictional standpoints. So there are things that I believe to not be true in here, things that are true that I believe in that are here. It is written in a way to upset, hopefully, everybody at some point. To again, when you're reading, you can't assume everything in this book is 100% my thought, my opinion, my stance. It's meant to make people think, to challenge your own and others' intentions, motives, own morality, and mortality.
All right, Alta Joseph
Hey,
M.
good.
Lenard.
Now I can hear you.
Aha. All right, Alta Joseph M. Leonard. You did mention that someone, I think an author wrote a book that Jesus Christ was into politics. So, how was Jesus Christ into politics and what would the author write about? So, we want to know how Jesus Christ entered into politics and how we can learn from his section. How can a Christian act in politics?
Right. Well, again, we should all read Romans, but again, you have to apply Romans to context with the uh, other parts of the Bible. You can't just pick and choose one or two scriptures. You have to apply them within the entire context of the Bible. Now, was Jesus involved in politics? Did he not overturn the tables of the money changers? That was obviously a clear political statement of politicians allowing these things to happen in the temple. That was a statement against Rome. So clearly, and the other thing is some American leftists like to try to claim Jesus was a socialist. Well, no. Overturning the tables was not a statement about redistribution of wealth. It was not about there can be no wealthy. Jesus also said, the poor will always be among you. There will always be some through their own fault or their own choice who refuse to do for themselves, right? And we can be charitable all we want to some degree. At some point, if someone refuses to help themselves, you have to wash your hands of them and walk away. So Jesus was very much involved in politics, but again, render unto Caesar does not mean turn your Christian duties of charity over to the government. He never said that anywhere.
Wow. I think I can also try to balance this where Jesus said that we are the light and the salt of this world, meaning that we are also leaders of this world, right? Because our leaders are supposed to make decisions. We are the light, supposed to be light unto others to help them know about Jesus or know about the kingdom of God. So even read the Old Testament, Daniel, Joseph were all into a kind of politics into such a way. So I believe that Christians can also enter into politics. But my issue is that how should Christians behave, or how should Christians act in the field of politics? Because most of the politics that we see today are or most often corrupt. So how can a Christian
Yes.
believer act faithfully in the biblical section, in the moral section, so that he will not become corrupt, so that he can walk in that line and still be faithful unto God?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you put it that way. You put it perfectly. There is indeed is a lot of corruption. The old saying, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? You've probably heard that. So we have to go into politics remembering our humility, and remembering hubris and pride is a sin, right? We must remain humble and understand that we are there not to enrich ourselves or to gain our own personal power and control over others. We must remain humble and understand we are there to serve others, not ourselves. And that's what happens. That's what goes wrong. Some get into politics and they buy their own hype, as the saying goes, right? They then land up seeing about what they can get for them rather than, or as a part of giving to others, what they can glean off the top, which is why redistribution of wealth, socialism, doesn't work. Never has, never will. It's been tried all kinds of places, and the American left like to say, oh, well, our brand of socialism is better than Marx or Lenin or Stalin or Mao or Che or Castro or Hitler. National Socialist Deutschland Arbeiter Party. They were socialists. Or Mussolini or Franco. It's all the same. It always fails and always will, because it's not the right system to work, because the power corrupts these people. They want to rule over people. The power goes to their head, and redistribution doesn't work because the government steals, say, 50% of someone's money, and then it goes to your capital, wherever that is, like Washington, D.C. in America, and the deep state, the ruling elite, the politicians then cut 80% of that 50% off the top for themselves, and then there's only pennies left over to actually try to help other people. That's why charity is the right way. Charities often form and they use volunteers. Maybe one or two are paid, but people aren't paid. So you give $100 to a charity, 90% of that, 90 cents of that actually goes to help the people it's intended to help. Oh, and it looks like there's something going on in my neighborhood here. So cops are all over the place. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to go off. But I think you see what I'm saying there. If I take money from Steve, if I'm stealing 80% of it and only give 20% of it to Eve, how is that helping anybody?
Oh, all right. I think Alta, just can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you, but like I said, there's cops all over
All
my
right.
block. There's something going on in my block. I'm going to have to drop off and go see what's going on. Because again, I mean, politics should be local. Your local community, your neighbors, your family have to come first. Then you try to help others through charity. So I'm going to have to drop off. But thank you again so much for having me on. Check out Terror Strikes coming.
All right, that is how we end our discussion today with Joseph M. Lenard and Alta. This is your host, Prophet or Pastor Duodu Henry Appiahkorang, an author of over 70 books as well. Share this podcast on all channels, and connect with my podcast Isaiah Discussions on all podcast channels, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you can, the main podcast channel, and become a blessing. You are blessed, you are connected.